In this tutorial, we're going to combine 3 different images to make this surreal composite of a hitchhiker making his way into a beautiful alternate dimension through a portal that's been burnt into his drab and dreary reality. We're going to achieve this mainly by using masks and by playing around with a few blending modes. Let's get started. So with this photo open, and I found this photo on Unsplash by the way, we're going to actually bring in right away the burnt hole image. I'm going to actually bring my opacity down so I can see underneath, see what I'm doing here. So we're just going to scale it up round about to where we want it to be, just remembering that we're going to have our alternate dimension underneath that hole. Bring your opacity back up. Right away we're just going to mask out that center part of the hole so that we can see what's underneath it. To do that, we're just going to come up here and grab the quick selection tool. Select everything inside the hole. It's probably going to miss some parts, so make sure that you select these little guys too on the inside. These little frayed bits of the paper. Once you have everything selected, come on down to create new layer mask. Now obviously that mask is the opposite of what we want. We want everything that's inside the hole to be revealed and everything outside to be hidden. So go ahead and invert, Control-Command-I to invert that mask so you can see the little arm of the guy inside the hole. And then come up to this blending mode and switch it to, I believe it was darken. Yeah, and that did a pretty good job. That's already looking pretty cool, but obviously we want to put the other dimension inside of the burnt hole. So let's bring in our mountains and Milky Way. This is just what I chose for my alternate dimension, but you can choose something else, whatever you'd like. Whatever you visualize when you imagine a more beautiful world. So just grab the image that you settled on for your alternate dimension and drag her on in. I'm going to bring my opacity down on this and then scale it to show as much of that image as possible. I want to capture the stars and the Milky Way and the snow-capped mountains, all that goodness. I want to see it all. So as much as I can possibly fit, I'm going for it. Bring the opacity back up. And now if I just Control or Command and click on that mask from the burnt hole, I can create a new layer mask on the Milky Way layer. But obviously it's the opposite of what we want. So I'm going to Control or Command I to invert that. And now it's perfect. Look at that. So if you notice what we just did, it actually cut off the guy's arm, and we don't want that. We want him to have an arm. How's he gonna like hitchhike without an arm? So let's get that arm back in here. What we gotta do is just Control or Command J to duplicate the background layer. Let's call it hitchhiker mask, because we're just gonna mask in his arm. So bring that all the way to the top and come up and grab the object selection tool so that you can just draw a box around the upper half of this guy's body. Come on down, create a new layer mask. And his arm is back in the game. So I'm going to come back down to my Milky Way mountains, and above that layer I'm going to place a vibrance adjustment layer because I want to make this like really vibrant and really pop. So make sure that you have your clipping mask button on, which just makes it to where that adjustment layer is only affecting the layer below it, which is our mountain range Milky Way layer. Bring your vibrance all the way up to 100. We're going to go bold with this one. We want it to pop. That looks pretty good. Turn it off and on, you see what we just did? We just added a lot of vibrance. Now with your vibrance layer selected, come down to the Milky Way layer by holding Control to select them both, and then hit Control or Command J to duplicate both of those layers, and then Control or Command E to merge those layers. Let's call this glow, because we're about to make that alternate dimension glow, and it's gonna be rad. So let's right away convert this glow layer to a smart object. Come up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, set the radius to 5, and set the blending mode on this layer to screen. Look at that. If you turn it off and on, you can see that we've created a bit of a glow. But we want to go bold, like I said, so we're gonna like go crazy with this glow. Control or Command J to duplicate that glow layer, and then double click on the Gaussian Blur, and set the radius here to 30. Bah! Look at that. Do it once again. Control or Command J, double click on the Gaussian blur. Let's set the radius here to 50, and we are gonna do it one more time. Control or Command J, double click on the Gaussian blur, and let's set the radius this time to 100. Yes, that is quite the glow. In fact, I think it might be a bit much. I think it kind of blurs the image too much. So what we're gonna do is sharpen it up. We're gonna come down to the Milky Way layer, the very first one at the bottom, the OG Milky Way mountain layer, and we're gonna duplicate it. Now don't grab the duplicated one because that's gonna mess up the vibrance clipping mask. So just grab the original, like the very bottom one, and drag that up to the top of the glow layers, and then right away come to Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. Set your amount to 150 and set your radius to 2.5. Say okay. So that's sharpened it up, but it's just a dark, sharp layer. So now set the blending mode to hard light. It has covered up some of the glow still, so I'm gonna bring the opacity on this layer to 55. Well, this is like a ton of layers for this glow, so I'm gonna go ahead and just select them all by holding shift and come down to this little folder that groups it all together and just call it Milky Way. So that's looking pretty good, but what I think it could use is a little texture. So I grabbed a couple paper textures from Envato. I know that there are places that you can find textures for free, and I have links in the description below for you to find those. As for me, I am going to open the textures that I found and I'm going to apply them to this image. I'm going to drag in this first one. I'm going to scale it up. And I'm just going to play around with the blending modes. And this is really fun to do. You can see that every single blending mode creates a different effect. And I think for this one, what I found to work was linear burn. That's the one that I liked. But it seemed a bit too much for me, so I brought the opacity down to like 70. There we go. And also, I didn't want the texture to be covering up my beautiful mountain range, so I created a mask. And here's how I did it. First, I want to make sure that this guy's arm is included in the part that has texture. The only part that I don't want texture in is my little alternate dimension on the other side with the mountains and the Milky Way. So what I did was I control or command clicked on the hitchhiker mask to select his arm, and then I control or command shift clicked on the burnt hole layer mask, and what that does is it creates a kind of intersecting mask so that it selects only the bits that I want to create this mask out of. Click create new layer mask. And look at that. It has taken away all the texture from my alternate dimension, but kept it on everything else, which is quite nice. I'm gonna actually grab one more texture for this one, and we're just gonna repeat the process of what we just did. So I'm gonna drag it on, I'm gonna scale it up, and I really like this paper texture. Just gives it a little something, you know? And I think I set the blending mode on this one to soft light, yes. But then I found that it's a bit too orange or brown for my liking. So I came up to image, adjustments, black and white. And that just kind of muted it and toned it down a bit. Now again, I don't want that texture on top of my alternate dimension mountain range Milky Way picture. So I just control or command click on the layer below it, the mask that we just made, and create a layer mask. And that takes the texture off of that part that I don't want it on. And there you have it. We have a beautiful vintage hitchhiker making his way into an alternate dimension, a more beautiful world. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you learned something new today and that you can apply the techniques that you learned in your future projects. Remember the many possibilities of layer masks and how fun it can be to play around with blending modes to create different effects. Follow along for more and feel free to reach out in the comments if you have any questions. Until next time.